Alright, well, off the record, I just want to apologize if I sound a little bit off. I was at the hospital all weekend for my stepbrother. But just want to start off by saying good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natalie Lopez, and today we'll be talking about pornography and male sexual violence. However, before I do start, I want to give some clarifications on the terminology that I'll be using. Firstly, when I speak about graphic sex, I am referring to the visual, print, film, and internet pornography. And secondly, when using the term reward, it is a reference to an important chemical, dopamine, which is released in the brain during pleasurable moments. According to the article, Aggression and Sexual Behavior in the Best-Selling Pornography Videos, a content analysis update by Dr. Anna J. Bridges, an associate professor in the Department of Psychological Science at the University of Kansas, states that in her experiment of analyzing 304 scenes of pornography, she found that 88.2% contained physical aggression, principally speaking about spanking, gagging, and flapping. While 48.7% of the scenes, Australian adolescents, sexually expert and researcher also found that about 88% of sexually explicit material, or SEM, contained physical aggression, meaning that although these are two different studies from two different places, they found just as similar. About 88% pornography contains physical aggression as well as graphics. Therefore, my main claim today is that looking at graphic sex can increase the likelihood of male sexual violence. In support of this claim, I'll be talking about the observational social learning theory, how pornography acts like an addictive drug to the user, and how exposure to the graphic sex normalizes sexual behavior. With that said, let's just get straight to the point. The constant exposure to sexually explicit material, males tend to fall subject to observational social learning theory. Before I get into more detail about the observational learning theory, I want to give you a little bit of background on Dr. Michelle L. Guevara, who speaks a little more in depth about this theory. Dr. Guevara holds a doctorate in child mental health services research and evaluation from the Department of Mental Health at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She was a predoctoral fellow of the National Institutes of Mental Health and was a joint fellow of the American Schools of Public Health Centers of Disease Control. In her article, X-rated material, the perpetration of sexually aggressive behavior among children and adolescents is there a link? She states that this observational learning theory suggests that human beings learn specific social behaviors from observing others, imitating and having their behavior reinforced. Violence in the form of an interactive media may provide the opportunity to observe violence, practice it, and then reinforce it through repetition. Reward and realism. From this perspective, viewing pornography that portrays sexual aggression as rewarding may increase an individual's own sexually aggressive behavior. In other words, men will begin to watch what they have previously seen and sexually explicit material in hope to receiving this reward. However, if females are exposed to an aggressive form of sex, they will follow their partner to proceed with such actions and believe that it's okay. According to Emily F. Rothman, who is an associate professor in the Department of the Community Health Science whose expertise is in violence prevention, stated that some people also coerce their partners to do things that they see in SEM. 11% of female patients at urban community health centers stated that they were forced or threatened to participate in sexual behaviors that the perpetrators saw in pornography. The results of two qualitative studies also suggest that people are sometimes pressured to imitate sexual acts that their partners first saw in pornography. One study found that women are pressured to engage in anal sex when their male partners see SEM featuring anal sex, and a second study found that young women and men alike were trying sexual acts and positions that they first seen pornography with their partners. In one case described in the literature, a young woman reported that they were surprised that they were in so much pain from anal sex that she needed ibuprofen, because women in pornography seem to enjoy it so much. This then causes that aggression to increase between males and females in their sexual relationship most of the time. Females do find themselves imitating certain scenes that their partners learn through the observational learning theory in hopes that they will be rewarded. My second claim is how pornography acts like an addictive drug to the user. As I mentioned earlier in my speech, of dopamine is a brain chemical that is released during pleasurable moments. However, this very same chemical is released when someone is on drugs. The constant browsing of sexually explicit material and graphic sex becomes an initial addiction. Dr. Valerie Van, who is a medical research counsel senior fellow at the University of Cambridge, found that the trial experiment with people who substantially difficulties controlling their sexual behavior, and this was having a significant consequence for them, affecting their lives and relationships. In many ways, they show similarities in their behavior to patients with drug addiction. In this very same study, she also came to realize that 3 regions of the brain, the ventral stratum, the dorsal anterior, and the amygdala, were the same brain regions that were being affected with those who were in drugs. In the same procedure of wanting more, they would, people with drugs look for a higher dosage versus people who are sexually active. They try to look for a different method to getting that reward, meaning they would try a different sex position, a different sex toy, or even a different sex partner. But lastly, the exposure to the graphic sex normalizes violent sexual behavior. For example, in an article written by the Daily Telegraph by the Wendy Tu, she points out how porn videos where women are being destroyed sexually comes to look like to the normal sex entertainment. Meaning, nowadays we see an advertisement where females are used as an object. So in order to sell certain products, males get their attention by seeing the female. And this then later causes them to even in video games where some female characters are sexually provocative. At the end of the day, we are exposed to so many different forms of graphic sex that we have to find it to be normal in their everyday life, but this then does cause males to act sexually violent towards their female partners. Thank you.
All right, well, the proposition's identified, the contents are previewed pretty clearly, although I do think you rushed through that first point in the preview. It was clearer when you got to it in the body of the speech what your claim was, but that was also a little bit rushed. There's not a numerical signpost on it. The second two, point 2 and point 3, are more clearly labeled in the body of the speech. That was okay. It seemed like you spent a lot of time qualifying the one doctor that you cite in the first section quite a bit, which is fine. I was thinking that you were doing that because that doctor's research was going to be substantially used in other parts of the presentation, and it really wasn't any more used than any other piece of evidence there, so it seemed a little excessive at that particular point. You had good evidence on all of the individual points. I thought that you did a pretty good job explaining things. There's a good explanation on the second and the third point about how these things kind of come together. The negative impact, I think, is a little bit harder to evaluate, especially on the second point. If it encourages people to try certain things, why is that particularly dangerous unless there's some harm that occurs from that? The closest you come to any harm is that some women found a particular type of sexual activity uncomfortable. There's not really much discussion of whether or not after trying it they continue it or feel obligated to engage in that behavior with their partners, and I think that that's the kind of information that would show that there is in fact a long-term harm on this particular point. The normalization issue, you explained the theory behind this. One of the things I think is missing is some more general data about the presence of sexual violence in relationships. We've got the theory being explained, but there's not much indication that people behave differently in their sexual relationships than they did before access to this was widely available, or like I said, it's in theory nicely explained, and you have one set of statistical information that says that that they have pretty much the same content of violence in them. 88%. You mentioned that slapping, spanking, and the other one, gagging, were the particular things that you were mentioned that all seem to be part of that process. The degree of violence involved in that, I think that there's got to be some way of measuring that. Otherwise, it's just one of those things where people go, I don't know. I'm not a sex therapist or teacher, so I don't necessarily want to, cross the line and talk about some of these things. I'm a little uncomfortable about that. But people engage in a variety of sex play without necessarily having themselves be endangered or their relationships be endangered. If you could correlate it, for instance, to problems that people have in their marriages or in willingness to commit to other people or the frequency with which they change partners or something like that, that I think might be a way to measure that a little bit more. There are a couple of places where you do a nice job when you finally get away from all of the reading and you start talking to us and explaining things. I think that works really well. But boy, when you are talking to us and reading stuff, is it obvious that it's just reading to you? Because it's you don't look at us, you look up, you've got your body all akimbo while you're looking down the whole time. You're not very careful about the pronunciation there, so that you need to be a little bit more practiced with that. If you're going to be dependent on that much information in the presentation, you need to be more familiar and practice the presentation of it. All right, thank you.